Welcome to Running Hot, the all-new motorsports betting podcast from Action Network. I'm your host, Nick Giffen, predictive analyst here at Action Network. And joining me, my co-host, Steven Young of Roto Grinders, better known as Stevie TPFL. And this is the Daytona 500 episode of Running Hot. Stevie, it's time for Daytona. I know you're excited. I mean, it's Speed Weeks, Daytona. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm doing great. A little tired at the track really late last night because of qualifying. At the track all week, but yeah, I mean, it's Daytona 500. Like, there's nothing more exciting than Daytona 500. I know the Chiefs and the Eagles, they just kind of did their thing, but it has nothing on the Daytona 500.
No, especially not from a betting, gambling, sweat standpoint, right? Because anything can change in an instant at Daytona. We're definitely going to talk about that, the style of racing and all of that. Of course, we're going to give a preview of the race, and then we're going to go through our picks. But the season is finally here. Like you said, Europe pole qualifying last night. That's already taken place. And Alex Bowman the showman, won the pole, extending his record consecutive front row starting spot streak. And alongside of him is his teammate, Kyle Larson, the exact same front two starting drivers as last year, just flipped. This year it's Bowman 1, Larson 2, instead of Larson 1, Bowman 2. The rest of the field will be set by tonight's dual qualifying races. But before we dive into those, the races and our Daytona 500 best bets, we got a few things to talk about. Of course, first up being those duels. So, Stevie, let's start with Duel 1. What are you looking for in Duel 1 tonight?
I think both duels really, last year we saw not a lot of aggressiveness because of the shortage of cars, and it was the big thing coming into the races last year, especially with the duels. So no practice this year. We just went into qualifying, we ran a couple laps, and now the cars are going right back out on the track for these dual races. So I'm really interested to see, like, are we going to get aggressive racing or non-aggressive racing? Adjusting for Duel 2 after watching a Duel 1, I think is really important. But I mean, as far as like going to like Alex Bowman, we have a large sample size. This is the sixth time in a row for him on the front row. He hasn't finished better than 13th in any of those 5 races. So he's going to keep this car clean, which definitely leads to, I mean, Byron may be struggling, but the Fords are right here. They're going to hook up early. They're going to hook up fast. And I mean, we're going to have one green flag pit stop, assuming that there's no issues. And I think the Fords are going to be the group and manufacturer to watch in this first dual race.
I totally agree with you. I mean, you have the Penske teammates, Ryan Blaney and Joey Logano, and their pseudo teammate, the Wood Brothers racing car of Harrison Burton there. So I do think those drivers especially hook up, but even just all the Fords. I know there's obviously Michael McDowell. He's going to try to help Zane Smith get into the show there. So maybe they try to link up with the Penskes as well. I'm also very interested in the Toyota camp in Duel 1. Bubba Wallace, Ty Gibbs, and Christopher Bell, they're going to be the ones I believe that end up challenging the Fords late in this race if everybody's able to keep it clean. And as far as, I know this is the betting show, but as far as a daily fantasy play, I think Ty Gibbs is my favorite play on the whole slate, just because I think he's going to be solo owned, and I think those Toyotas are going to go to the front. He has nothing to worry about as far as saving his car or anything like that. So very interesting DFS play. But from a betting perspective, I really like Ryan Blaney in Duel 1. I think, I talked about this. I think you've talked about this a little bit. I feel like he's kind of owed from Team Penske a little bit there as far as, payback for being the consummate teammate last year, especially to Joey Logano to help him win the championship. So that's what I'm looking forward to in Duel 1. What about Duel 2?
I think Duel 2 is a little bit more interesting. The race for getting into the 500, I think, is way better in the first duel between Zane and Chandler, where in the second one, Austin Hill kind of gifted with Connor Daly having issues yesterday. I mean, the first time he's going to hit the track is going to be during this race. So I think that the race to get in way better in the first duel. I mean, Zane versus Chandler, if you can find like a head-to-head prop, I would just take whoever you get better value on, because I think it really is just kind of a coin flip, where if we get like Austin Hill minus 130 against Connor Daly, I'll pay the juice because it's no contest. There's a lot of Chevys in this race. Austin Hill should have no trouble getting in here. Travis Pastrana already came out and said that, like, don't expect him to race very hard in this duel. So I don't expect Pastrana to try to beat Hill to get someone else in, type of thing. So I mean, I'm watching the Toyotas in this one, right? Like, you have Reddick with his new teammates of Martin Truex Jr. and Denny Hamlin. Denny Hamlin, one of the best super speedway racers. He's going to be aggressive. I think we're going to see a much different approach for Denny Hamlin in these dual races this year. Work with Reddick, work with Truex. The Toyotas go to the front. Chase Elliott's kind of like not a lone Chevy, but he's going to need some help from Kyle Busch. Is Kyle Busch, going to embrace this Chevy role and work with, Chase Elliott? And I mean, we already know Brad Keselowski, great super speedway racer, was by far the most aggressive person in the duels last year. So definitely looking at Keselowski to potentially win this race as well, depending on what type of odds we can get him in the duel too.
Yeah, for sure. I think Keselowski and Hamlin are very obvious contenders to win the race, as is, I think, Eric Almirola. He's done pretty well in these duels before, but I agree with you. I think those Toyotas are going to be strong. And one guy that's actually standing out in my model is Tyler Reddick at 12-1. I'm actually showing value on him there in my model for the duel number 2 here. So I think I would bet him, but I want to wait until duel 1 to complete before I bet Reddick in duel 2, because if somehow Bubba Wallace crashes that car in duel 1, 2311 Racing only has one backup car. So then I think maybe you see Tyler Reddick join his teammate Travis Pastrana in protect mode and just hanging back in that duel. So that could change it up a little bit for me. So I've actually not made any bets for duel 2 at all. Kind of waiting to see how duel 1 plays out. But as far as the rest of qualifying, is there any other notes you kind of were able to take away from qualifying and apply it to the race? I know it's pretty tough because qualifying and the race are so different, but is there anything at all that you noticed from qualifying that might be applicable to the Daytona 500?
Not really. I mean, there's been a lot of talk this week about Fords having a aero speed advantage. So I'm more watching that in the dual races tonight to see, like, is that really a thing? Does it look like they're a little bit better when in the draft? Because, I mean, track position was everything at super speedways last year, and that's something that we haven't talked about in years for super speedways. So I don't think qualifying, I mean, I hate the fact they didn't have like a 20-minute shakedown practice before qualifying, but I don't think qualifying really tells us much for the 500 outside of the fact that Bowman and Larson are, on the front row. Jimmy Johnson and Travis Pastrana are in the race, and they're likely going to take it pretty easy tonight. So I wouldn't expect like Legacy Motorsports to have a bunch of backup cars. So I expect Jimmy Johnson to kind of maybe feel this car out, but feel it out like towards the back and not really push it with this one.
Yeah, I would agree there. And as far as qualifying for me, I guess my only notable things were how really good those Penske cars were, not just in terms of like their aero speed advantage, but they handled really well as well. Those drivers were super smooth on the steering wheel. Whereas saw somebody else, like I can think of Eric Jones, for example, his car was bouncing around and he had to use both hands on the steering wheel through the corners. Whereas, the Penske guys, they were able to use just one hand. I noticed Bubba Wallace was also really good at just using the one hand the whole way around. So just maybe some handling things might come into play, but I mean, it's the Daytona 500. So those are tiny little things in comparison to how you just actually race and how the race itself shakes out. So speaking of how the race shakes out, let's talk about Daytona itself, the Daytona 500. Obviously, it's got a unique racing style along with Talladega and Atlanta, which is a little different, but similar in that it's a drafting race. So for those who may be newer listeners, newer bettors to NASCAR, talk about Daytona, the style of racing, and how that style of racing impacts betting.
It's not even, I mean, yeah, we're kind of classifying Atlanta as this type of race now. We can't even really put Talladega and Daytona together either because Talladega is just so much wider than Daytona, where if you make a huge block at Daytona, you're more likely to have a 20-car pileup than at Talladega. So, I mean, Daytona's kind of its own animal. We classify them as super speedways, Talladega and Daytona, because, I mean, we like to look at as much data as we possibly can But at the end of the day, there's so much variance at a racetrack like Daytona where you're more likely to take a lot more long shots and instead of taking favorites, because one block can take out a guy and really wipe out 20 cars. So looking at these long shots, it's completely different than what we do all season. Yeah, we look at long shots from time to time throughout the season, but I mean, the favorites are usually the favorites for a reason when we go to Las Vegas. So it's just a different mindset. And I know you and I have talked about this for years. You're one of the best when it comes to betting and playing fantasy at Daytona. So, I mean, we just look for that edge. And the edge this weekend is, getting a plus 6,000, getting a 50-1 bet where all it takes is one big crash. So, I mean, betting style for me this week at Daytona is I probably in the main 500 race won't have anybody under 10-1 and, especially to win the race.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. It's a great spot to, sprinkle some long shots simply because there's so much chaos at these races and a lot of randomness. I'm a math PhD. I'm a predictive analyst. And what I do is I try to predict the outcome of sporting events like races. And the best I can get predicting Daytona and Talladega from a finishing position perspective is about 10 to 15% of the randomness I can predict in terms of finishing position. So not very much at all. Whereas a track, I don't know, let's say Texas, a couple years I've been up north of 70% accuracy in the finishing prediction order. So it just goes to show this is so much more of a random deal that it behooves you to take these long shots. Also, when we're looking at Daytona, when we're looking at Talladega, or any race really, we do take a look at data. So what other kind of data or research are you using when you're preparing for Daytona, whether it's fantasy or betting, or just enjoying the race itself? What kind of data are you looking at?
I mean, you got to be there at the end of the race, right? So one of my favorite things to look at, and I don't look at this really anywhere else, is lead lap finishes. I want to know who is there at the end of the race. I start to look at that and I start to compare it to like average finish and average running position, because are these guys just running towards the back? Because at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, we want someone that is going to either run towards the front or run towards the back. A lot of the crashes happen in the middle of the field or right off of like the second or third group of cars where the big block happens up front. So I want guys that are going to kind of avoid it. So when I'm looking at like my top 10 bets and stuff like that, I'm really looking at like lead lap finishes and where these guys are running. If I'm looking for someone to win the race, I want someone that's running with a higher average running position. So I'm not really looking at like overall speed where we're looking at that almost everywhere else. So I'm just, who's going to be there? Like, that's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to predict who is just going to be on the track when the white flag waves.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there. I think it's super important to be there. And one stat I do like to look at, exactly like you're saying, is basically the rate at which you get caught up in a major incident. So whether, I consider a major incident to be off of the first two laps. So the lead lap or one lap down. Anything after that at a super speedway, I consider you've been in a major incident, because sometimes you can have a little hiccup and you lose the draft and you go one lap down. So I allow for that. But I just look at, how often you have a major incident. And one guy that really stands out to me is Ryan Blaney. 76% of the time since we moved away from restrictor plates and to the tapered spacer, 76% of the time, he has not had a major incident, which is incredibly good. That's what we want to see from these drivers. Another driver that stands out is Michael McDowell at 70%. Corey LaJoie, 82% without a major incident. So some of these drivers that have avoided these major incidents at super speedways are guys that I feel pretty good about, because you can come back to them and come back to them and come back to them, because for whatever reason, whether it's them hanging out in the back or being all the way at the front of the pack, they know how to avoid the major incidents. And then there's other guys that just seem to be involved in it every time. And so that definitely can help your capping style as well. So overall, we've got so many different types of bets, and we're going to take you through that for the Daytona 500, right? We've got outrights, top manufacturers, matchups, group bets, all sorts of different prop bets as well. So when you're building a Daytona 500 betting card, let's say you like a driver and you like him in his outright, you like him in his top 10, you like him in his top manufacturer. How are you building your betting card? Maybe not just with that one driver, but then overall as well.
Yeah, I mean, top 10s are going to be my favorite bet when it comes to Daytona and Talladega. There's always insane value. All you need is one or two big things to happen, and that happens a lot more than it doesn't. So top 10s are going to be my favorite. And I really like the group bets. This is something that we've seen a lot more over the last few years where you're getting four drivers and you're getting to pick one of those four drivers and you're getting plus odds on all four drivers. So really just kind of going through the stuff that we just talked about with the data and who could potentially be there at the end of the race and just giving myself the best chance out of those four drivers. I need my one driver to beat those other two drivers. So I really like group bets and I really like top 10 bets. Now I'm going to have outright bets as well. I jump on those really early, usually, a week before the clash even happens. So try to find value in that kind of stuff. But I mean, it's just like any other race, Nick, right? Like at the end of the day, we're looking for value. Betting card at Daytona is going to be way different than Vegas, but at the end of the day, I still want the value. So I'm looking for value. And most of the time, like I said, it's coming in top 10. So I'll have a lot more top 10 bets at a place like Daytona than I will at a place like Las Vegas.
Yeah, I agree with that. It absolutely is all about value, and it doesn't matter where you find value. And when we say value, I'm not necessarily meaning like long plus number odds. We're saying, all right, I made a bet at minus 150 on a prop bet, and because I had that as like minus 350 fair, then that's a lot of value. So when we talk about value, we're not just saying a value bet being a long shot or in the plus money. We're just saying compared to the implied odds that were given, if we think this is going to happen a lot more, that's what we want to do and bet that. So totally agree with you there. We're always looking for value, but I also agree top 10s are a great place to look, but you really need to shop around. Some books have a 33% hold on the top 10, whereas other books have over a 100% hold on the top 10. So you absolutely, number one thing you have to do is shop around. And I think a great place to do that, of course, is in the Action app, because you can look at all of the different books in one spot. When you're trying to place a bet, you can literally just go there, click on, I want to look at Corey LaJoie's top 10 odds. You click on it and it lists all the different books that have top 10 odds, and you can shop around that way super, super duper easily. So let's move into a little bit about race flow. Obviously, it's Daytona. It's the big Super Bowl of NASCAR, as some people call it, the Great American Race. And every driver wants to win the Daytona 500. So we know it's going to be lights out aggression at the end. But what about through the whole race, especially with the second year of this next gen car? How do we expect this race to play out?
So at Media Day yesterday, every single driver was like, we just can't sit back anymore. We can't sit back. We need to be in a position to attack, and you cannot sit back the first 100 laps of the race anymore. So I think we see a different Daytona 500 this year. I think we see aggression from the start. I think we see a lot of two wide racing. I don't think we see a lot of like single file 30 lap runs anymore. So I think that we're going to see much more aggression, trying to get yourself track position. Because I mean, if we look at just last season, I know it's 4 races, it's a small sample, but average running position correlated really well with average finishing position. So you really need to have track position with this new car. Are there going to be wrecks? Yes, there's going to be wrecks. Is aggression going to create wrecks? Yes, it is. Are we going to be blocking on lap 5? Probably not. But I think we see more blocking around like the end of the second stage throughout the third stage, where we typically don't see much blocking until the last like 20 laps of the race. So I think we see more aggression, which in terms for us is actually probably better for some of the long odds that we like, because I mean, the aggression always typically, potentially causes crashes. So I think the flow of this race is going to be much more aggressive. It's one of the only races that we go to where all 40 cars in the field have a potential to win the race. So I think that we see aggression, more bumping, way more two wide racing than, just single file racing this weekend.
And when you say all 40 cars have the potential to win this race, that's actually true. I mean, look at the Daytona cutoff race for the playoffs last year. Cody Ware had a chance to win that race if
Yep.
things played out the right way. And we could see that with the Daytona 500. Is it likely? No, but it is absolutely possible that Cody Ware wins the Daytona 500. I don't think it's likely. I'm not betting it, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. And I agree with you. When you say there's going to be aggression, it certainly favors a lot of these longer shot odds. And the aggression typically comes from the front because you're trying to protect that track position. So when that happens, it takes out a lot of the good cars that are running up towards the front, and it makes way for those cars in the mid pack, or even especially in the back of the pack, because they have enough time to slow down and get through things and avoid the wreck. That really favors the long shot. So I'm really glad you were at media day there to kind of get that information, talk to these drivers about that, because that's super, super helpful information when we're trying to fill out our betting card for the Daytona 500. Okay, let's go into some drivers because we all want to know, who should we be betting on? So let's break down the favorites. Of course, Ryan Blaney, Denny Hamlin, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott. Those are like the four favorites by the book odds. I don't necessarily agree with those. I think you got to throw in Joey Logano in there as well. So let's say those are the five favorites. And then there's a few peripheral favorites. Obviously, there's always Brad Keselowski, Bubba Wallace is in there. Let's say William Byron is in there. So let's break down the favorites. What are you looking at from the favorites? Are there any drivers you're gravitating more towards, or how are you analyzing overall just the favorites in general?
I mean, I agree with some of the favorites, right? I agree with Blaney. I agree with Chase Elliott. Chase Elliott, like the last 10 super speedway races, 9 lead lap finishes for Chase Elliott. He's been very good at avoiding issues. I think Blaney and Bubba are up there as well. Denny is just someone 6 top 5s in the last 12 super speedway races, since the start of 2020. Like, he's always in contention. He's won the Daytona 500 3 times. So, I mean, I agree with some of these favorites. Now, still, like, I wish we could get like odds on like Larson, finishing top 10, because they're always such huge favorites for Larson to finish in the top 10. And like, this is a guy I would bet no to finish in the top 10 every single time if they gave us like the odds, because I mean, he has an average finish of 23.2. This is a guy that continuously has issues. They're trimmed up. Like, these Hendrick cars come down to Daytona and they're trimmed up. It's just, I don't understand why. Like, we look at the numbers. We could see the numbers. Everyone can see these numbers. These numbers are available anywhere. So I don't understand why every single time we come down here, it's like Larson's a favorite to win the race. Larson's a favorite to not finish the race. Like, that in my book, like, that's what I want. Where can I bet Larson not finishing the race? Because he's finished 3 of the last 8 super speedways on the lead lap. So when looking at the favorites, he's by far my least favorite to talk about. I mean, I could definitely see betting, favorite money on Hamlin, Elliott, or Blaney. Logano's hit or miss. He's super aggressive. He's going to run up towards the front. So that's, when I'm looking to bet. But some of the books, like, we're getting a Logano at like 16-1 on some of the books. So, like, if you're shopping Logano's lines around, he's a favorite, but you're getting him at pretty good odds to, bet. So I don't know if I'd classify him as like a favorite, as far as like we're getting Larson at like 12-1. We're getting Hamlin at 12-1. We're getting Elliott at 12-1. So shop around. Like, if you're looking at a Logano, if you're looking at like a Blaney, shop these lines because, I mean, they're all over the place. Some of these lines, some of these places, they must have taken a lot of bets on these guys to start the week because they're really low. And then some of these books definitely want some action. So shop these lines. But as far as the favorites, Blaney probably favorite for me. And then after that, it would probably be Denny Hamlin, because it's Daytona and he's Denny Hamlin. I mean, there's nothing else. Nothing else needs to be said. This guy he gets it. He knows the aggression and when to be aggressive and when to back off. And he's just one of the best that we've ever seen on these types of tracks.
Yeah, I mean, you and I both know that. We were there together in 2016 when he won the race by inches over Martin Truex Jr. So obviously, I think Denny Hamlin's always going to stick out in my mind there. So there's this mid-tier now. Let's say, like, you've got maybe your Alex Bowman's, your Tyler Reddicks of the world, your Austin Cindric's of the world, who was last year's Daytona 500 winner, Kevin Harvick, Christopher Bell. There's this like mid-tier of like really good drivers, but they're not typically favorites at the super speedways. So I do want to like kind of gloss over them because I think any of them can win and they're all priced right around where they should be in that mid range. But I'm very curious about this, what I would call the lower mid tier. Do we think anyone from Colleague Racing or Front Row Motorsports or any of the rookies, like Ty Gibbs, for example, how do we project them faring? Are there any interesting ones, whether it's any of the rookies or Front Row or Colleague or I guess kind of Ricky Stenhouse Jr. He's in that lower mid-tier car, but he's such a good super speedway racer that I wouldn't quite throw him in that lower mid-tier. Where are you looking at in this lower mid-tier? Because I think this is a super interesting tier of drivers.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. Going back to the conversation of anybody has a chance to win this race. I mean, this is where that conversation comes in. We saw AJ Allmendinger and Justin Haley just work phenomenally together in the Xfinity Series. Now they're in the Cup Series. So I think Colleague Racing is super interesting, especially if they can get Chandler into the race on the duels on Thursday night. So I really like that. Michael McDowell is always a threat to win this race. New crew chief. I think that's something to note because a lot of his success last year was, strategy given. So I think Michael McDowell is always someone that's really interesting. I know we're like talking like mid to lower tier, but Eric Amarola in that Stuart Haas car, like, dude, I've had him circled for like the last 2 weeks. I think that he is someone, not only is he in the contention to finish these races, he's always in the contention to win these races as well. If he can go out and have a good duel race, he'll have some track position. So this one's tough as far as like what mid-tier, because we want to see where these guys are going to be starting after the duels. Like if we want these guys, I think we're going to be looking more towards the mid tiers that might start towards the back a little bit instead of starting in the middle, because I think I think we're going to see aggressiveness even in that like stage one towards the end. So I want my mid tier drivers that, I'm betting 30 or 40 to 1 or 50 to 1 on, maybe just kind of staying out of trouble in the first couple stages. So looking at that and then looking at who's finished, I mean, anybody's really in play here. I know you got a Eric Jones bet last week or the week before, right when the books came out. I love that one because I think that he has a legit chance to win this race as well.
Yeah, I'm very glad you mentioned Eric Almirola because I bet him when odds dropped for him. So DraftKings originally open odds and then FanDuel open odds later, and that's when I jumped on Eric Almirola because he was 50 to 1 then. But I think this is definitely an Eric Almirola style race. If it's going to be chaotic and he's really good at avoiding problems, again, his lead lap or top 2 lap finish rate is 76.5%, right up there with Ryan Blaney as well, and Bubba Wallace, Kevin Harvick in that range there. So another guy that just finishes at these super speedways. And I agree with you on AJ Allmendinger, Justin Haley. Interestingly enough, my model is showing some value on AJ Allmendinger at 50 to 1. Now, I haven't bet that yet because I'm shopping around for the best market I can find on AJ Allmendinger, whether it's the manufacturer or outright or some top 10 or any other thing that pops up. So I haven't bet him yet, but I will absolutely have an AJ Allmendinger bet before all is said and done with the Daytona 500 week leading up to the Daytona 500. So really like that analysis, and I'm glad to hear you say Eric Jones, Eric Almirola, the very differently spelled Erics, by the way. I'm glad to hear that you mentioned both of those because I have outrights on both of them. So, I guess we talked duels. We talked about a bunch of these drivers. I'm happy to talk anything and everything Daytona. So before we get to our picks, is there any last thoughts you had? Anything else you want to talk about? I know we maybe glossed over the mid-tier or upper mid-tier. Anything else you want to talk about for Daytona before we get to our picks?
I mean, I say the same thing, when it comes to fantasy or betting. Anytime I get the chance is when we're looking at Daytona 500 or Talladega, just remember bankroll management is extremely important. We're excited. The NASCAR season is back. Daytona, we got drivers at 50 to 1 that can potentially win these races, but just be smart on 1, shopping lines, and 2, like knowing your bankroll and how much you want to bet going in, and, going through and, hey, maybe I'm going to put 0.2 units on this guy instead of putting a whole unit. I don't need a whole unit bet to hit at 50 to 1. Would it be fantastic, Nick? Yes, it would be fantastic. But at the end of the day, the odds of that happening are still lower than, what we're going to have at tracks that we're going to have a higher prediction rate. So bankroll management and being smart, it's your money. Like, be smart with it, have fun with it. Like, hey, I can put $10 on this dude at, 125 to 1, and I can sweat it the whole race and have a lot of fun with it. So have fun with it. And bankroll management would be the two things that anytime that we're at Daytona or Talladega that I just like to hammer home.
I cannot stress that enough. Thank you for bringing that up, because everybody's in a different position. I know I'm going to have probably a lot of bets on this race, but I'm able to do that for multiple reasons. It's because, one, I've been doing this forever. And, I've built a statistical model to predict these races. And, two, I just have that knowledge of NASCAR. So I will have a lot of bets, but for people who want to tail us, I would say pick your favorite bets, be smart with those. Bankroll management, because I'm going to try to hit any edge I can find. Whereas maybe if you're a newer player, you just want to hit the bigger edges. So I try to put out my bigger edge bets first when I track things in the app, or I tweet them out, or write them up in an article. I try to write up my favorite ones. Now I'll end up tracking other things as well, or putting them, maybe writing up an article about them. But by and large, the things I get to early and midweek for this week in particular, I will love the most. And then as I get closer to race time, I'll add some more things in, but there'll be smaller edges that I'm taking, which I won't necessarily recommend if you're a newer player, a newer bettor, or somebody just with a smaller bankroll to bet as well. So I'm glad you brought that up, because not everybody is the same in their approach to betting, in their risk tolerance. And I have very high risk tolerance, so I'm okay with that as well. So really good point. All right. We got through all the fluff, not really the fluff, but the stuff we had to talk about to preview Daytona. But I know the people want the picks. So it's time for some picks. We've got to dive into these bets. So we are going to take you for a lap around the Daytona 500. Yep, 4 turns around the track. 4 picks from Stevie, 4 picks from myself. We've taken the green flag, and it's time to dive into turn 1. Start us off. First Daytona 500 pick. What is your turn 1 pick?
I mean, we've talked about it, I feel like, a lot already, but top 10 bets, right? So Todd Gillen, top 10 plus 500. Love this. I'm excited. You see me smiling because here we are, 5-1 top 10 bet right off the bat. This guy just finished 7th at Talladega in the fall. He is someone that has crashed 3 of his first 4 super speedways, so there is some risk here. Obviously, my model though has him around a 22% chance of finishing inside the top 10, which is nice value at 5-1. These long shot odds, these are my favorite types of bets for the 500, and getting a driver to finish top 10 at plus 500. And if you shop this around, it's kind of moved a little bit, so you might be able to even find it better. So really like Todd Gillen. I think that they obviously hit on something at Talladega. He had a much longer average running position, which to me tells me he stayed towards the back a little bit more. So I'm hoping that he works with McDowell and Gillen, both having potential to finish inside the top 10. So Todd Gillen, top 10, 5-1 is where I'm going to go for turn 1.
I love it. And, you said you have him at 22% to finish in the top 10. My model has him 21.3%. So we're both right in that range, right? 20%. That means 1 out of 5 times. So plus 400 would be fair value. And we're showing a little bit better than that. So we're showing in the high plus 300s as fair value, getting it at 5-1. That is super duper value. For my turn 1 pick, I'm going to take Todd Gilliland, but I'm not going to take him in the top 10. I mean, I will, but I also am going to take him as the top Ford finisher. I'm going to put 0.2 units on that one. I actually took him at 55-1, and I wrote him up at Action Network at 55-1. He's since moved to 40-1. Would absolutely still bet him at 40-1. And that's because my model has him at 4% to finish as the top Ford, which is 25-1 as fair odds. So very happy to get this at 40-1 still. You mentioned how well he has run, especially in that playoff Talladega race, but also the 2 Daytona races. In last year's Daytona 500, he ran in the top 15 for 70.5% of the laps that he ran. And then, of course, he crashed out with 12 to go in the big one while running inside the top 10. The big one that broke my heart. I was literally leading the Millie Maker when that crash happened. He also has 69.1% top 15 rate at that playoff Talladega race. And then Daytona, he was over 50% inside the top 15 as well. So when you're running in the top 15 as frequently as Todd Gilliland is, all you need to do is avoid the wrecks. And then you probably only have a couple Fords you need to beat. So 40-1, just too long here for Todd Gilliland. Like I said, I got him fair at 25-1. So I'm happy to bet it down to 33-1. That leaves us a little wiggle room in case my model's a little too high on him. Although I don't think it is, because mine's, I think, even just a touch lower than yours is. And I've seen other models out there that are even higher on Todd Gilliland. So definitely like this. I'm totally fine with betting him all the way down to 33-1 for top Ford. All right, we've gotten through turn 1. Time to go into turn 2. It's time for another pick. What is your turn 2 pick?
I'm going to go to one of these group bets. You know, we talked about these at the beginning of the show. This one right here is a group C. This is on multiple sites. It's Keselowski, Wallace, Cindric, and Reddick. I'm going to take Bubba Wallace plus 250 at a full unit here. Wallace is the best average finish of any driver over the last 8 Daytona races, not just this group, any driver. In 11 Daytona races, he has 4 top 5 finishes and 7 lead lap finishes. We saw with this new car, running position matters at Daytona and Talladega. Wallace had the 5th highest average running position, while Cindric was 9th. Keselowski was 20th, and Tyler Reddick was 27th. If we take the wrecks out of the equation, I have Wallace as the favorite to win this group, and we're getting him at plus 250 where everyone else in this group is. So not only do I like Bubba Wallace to win this group, I think he has a chance to win this race. He's shown time and time again that he definitely has what it takes to win these super speedway races. So give me Bubba Wallace over these other 3 guys at plus 250 as my turn 2 pick.
Very nice pick. Of those 4, he has the 2nd highest rate of finishing on the first 2 laps, only behind Austin Cindric, who doesn't have a very large sample size. Right. But that means, with all these other guys, they have much larger sample sizes than Cindric. So of those other 3, obviously they're Bubba Wallace the best at finishing on the lead lap or 1 lap down, usually on the lead lap for him. I mean, he's that good. So really like that pick. For my turn 2 pick, I'm going to stay with you on these group bets. I love the group bets here this week. And I'm going to go to group B. That's Joey Logano, Kyle Busch, William Byron, and Ross Chastain. And of those 4, I'm going to take William Byron at plus 290 for a full unit as well. I have Byron slightly favored over Logano to win the group. I know that's probably a little blasphemy because I think we all think of Logano as the better super speedway racer, but he also doesn't finish a lot like we talked about earlier in the show. He's so aggressive that he gets wrapped up in a lot of these wrecks. So I actually have Byron slightly favored over Logano to win the group. And even if it was the other way around, even if Logano was slightly favored over William Byron, we're getting Byron at plus 290, whereas Logano's plus 250. So there's still extra value there on Byron. Byron also is, he's had trouble finishing the super speedway races, but I feel like that's been a lot more bad luck than aggression. But when he finishes, he usually finishes really, really well. He won at Daytona in the summer of 2020. He was 2nd in 2019 at Daytona. And Talladega 2021, again, 2nd. So he's had a lot of top 2 finishes at these super speedways. So when he does finish, he's very often finishing up front. Even just last year, he led the most laps at Atlanta 1, which is what I call a pseudo speedway. It's got that super speedway with a little 1.5-mile feel. So not the best comparison, but it's still a drafting race. He led the most laps there. He also led the most laps at the first Talladega race last year. So the guy is running up front. He's finishing up front when he's not getting caught up in these wrecks. So I actually have him winning this group about 28% of the time, which is plus 260 as fair odds. So I like it at plus 290, probably would bet it down to plus 275. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this group in particular, Stevie.
I'm not a huge Chastain fan when it comes to super speedways, so kind of crossing him off. So I really think it does come down to Logano, Kyle, and Byron. I mean, Logano, I think he's someone that finishes top 3 or outside the top 20. So, I mean, getting plus money at that. I expect Kyle Busch and maybe Byron to work together. So you just kind of hope that, maybe Busch is pushing Byron at the end of the day. So I like this one. I like it a lot because you're getting it at plus 290. You're not getting this at like plus 250 like you were talking about with Logano. So I do like this one. Again, man, like I'm about to get into more about Ross Chastain, but I really think this is a 3-player group. I'm
Yeah.
just going to go out and say that.
I like it. I agree with you there. Even though he did win a super speedway race last year, I still, on the whole, am not a Chastain guy at super speedways, especially at the odds that he's at now, since he did win that race at Talladega last year. All right, so I'm glad you didn't throw a block on me on that pick because we're going down the back straight, and that a lot of blocks happen there. You can get a big wreck, but we made it through the back straight. Now it's time to dive into turn 3. In turn 3 here, Stevie, what is your third pick?
I'm going to go to a head-to-head matchup. You're not going to see me talk about these a lot when it comes to Daytona Talladega, but you're going to see me talk about them a lot overall throughout the season. Denny Hamlin over Ross Chastain, minus 120 at BetMGM. I checked before we got rolling. This is still up. It's that feud that people want to be a thing, and it keeps being a thing because Chastain keeps wrecking Hamlin. But this is not even close. I'll pay the juice on this one because Denny Hamlin is a much better super speedway racer than Ross Chastain. Chastain has 0 top 10 finishes in 9 Daytona races. He's only finished on the lead lap 3 times in those races. He's a very, very aggressive race car driver, which is fantastic. But when you're very aggressive and you're making a ton of blocks throughout a whole day worth of racing at Daytona, you're likely not going to finish on the lead lap. And that's what continues to happen with Chastain. Denny Hamlin, on the other hand, this dude has 22 lead lap finishes in 34 races. He's finished in the top 5 in 11 of those races, including 3 wins at Daytona. Like this should be like minus 160, 170, even in a head-to-head at Daytona. So I think this is insane value, even at paying the juice a little bit over there on MGM. So really like Denny Hamlin to beat Ross Chastain. And you can throw all the blocks you want, but I'm taking Denny Hamlin in this one.
Yeah, I have a hard time personally just taking minus odds at super speedways, but if I did, I would take this one. My model actually is showing value on Denny Hamlin here at minus 120. My model has Denny as the race favorite, and it's not super high on Chastain. So I was very surprised I actually showed value on this at minus 120. So sure, why not? I'm happy to go on board with a minus bet at a super speedway.
There's not many of them, Nick. There's
exactly. There really aren't. There really aren't. And that's why when you find one, I'm super impressed. Well done there on finding a minus odds. All right. I'm actually going to stay on the head-to-head train here as well. And unfortunately, it actually is currently off the board, but I do think it'll come back up at some point. And if it does, Jimmy Johnson plus 130 versus Alex Bowman. I love this bet. I'm not super high on Alex Bowman at super speedways. He's just a guy that he doesn't dominate. He doesn't run up front. He kind of just runs around in the pack. And when that happens, you can get caught up in wrecks. And Jimmy Johnson is Jimmy Johnson. I mean, he's the 7-time NASCAR series champion. He's so experienced. And one of my favorite things about Jimmy Johnson, I know he's been away for a few years, but he was in IndyCar. And the first oval race he ever ran in IndyCar, he finished 6th against some of the best IndyCar racers in the world. He beat a few of them. I mean, he is still a good racer. And hell, IndyCars are faster than NASCARs. So I'm not worried about his reactions or anything like that. Jimmy Johnson, I have no problem with taking him here at the super speedway. And this is partly just a fade on Alex Bowman. And also just, I love getting plus 130 on a head-to-head matchup at a super speedway. Another nice thing, and obviously Jimmy's locked in, so we don't have to worry about if he makes a field or doesn't. So if you find this matchup at any book now, you can bet it. You don't have to just bet it at a book that is must start for action because Jimmy is going to start. So you can bet him at any book now. If this reopens anywhere with Jimmy Johnson at plus money, I would say anything over plus 115 versus Alex Bowman. So my model has about plus 115 fair as well. So as long as this pops back up, I'm going to take Jimmy Johnson plus 115 or longer versus Alex Bowman. And I do think as we get closer to the Daytona 500, we'll see a whole plethora of matchups and other kinds of prop bets. So I do think this one will pop back up at some point in time. Just curious about maybe your thoughts here as well. What do you think about Bowman in particular?
We'll get this bet pop back up. It's the battle of the 48s, right? Yeah. Books love this kind of stuff. So Yeah, I mean, I like this a lot because Jimmy's not running for points. He's not running a full season. So he doesn't have to go up there and mix it up in stage 1 and stage 2. He can kind of keep the car clean. Alex Bowman's had all the track position in the world at Daytona and at Talladega and just has never done anything with it. So, yeah, I love this. Love the fact that, like, we're getting a guy that running for points against a guy that needs points and that has track position and, very trimmed out race car because he has the pole. I mean, look at his speed last night. There's no way that car's not super trimmed out for qualifying. So, yeah, he's not even going to get to mix it around a lot in the duels tonight either because the car is so trimmed out. So, really like this Jimmy Johnson plus money bet over Alex Bowman. I'm with you. I like this one a lot.
Yeah, I think this is one of my favorites and of the whole slate that I've found so far. So definitely one I would recommend. Like when I talked about top bankroll management, this is a really good one for bankroll management because it's quite likely to hit. I mean, just around 50-50 to hit, and it's good value. So I like this one a lot. And when we talk about that stat of finishing on the lead lap or anything like that, since 2019. Alex Bowman at these races has finished on the lead lap just 7 out of the 15 since we moved away from restrictor plates. So not a very good rate there for him as well. And like you said, all the track position in the world has done absolutely nothing with it. All right, we're going to come through turn 3 into turn 4. We see the start finish line in sight, but I need your turn 4 pick first.
Well, last week I feel like I started a thing, right? Like I'm just going to make my turn 4 bet like the hot take turn. I did, for everyone that listened last week, when I got into Tennessee last weekend, I did take Chase Elliott under 3.5 wins, like I said I would. So I'm going to go top Chevrolet, Ty Dillon at 50-1 for the Daytona 500 as my turn 4 pick. Chase Elliott has the best average finish, 15.1 among Chevy drivers over the last 8 Daytona races. Ty Dillon has an average of 15.2. He's only run 6 of those 8 races, but with the variance that Daytona brings, I'm excited to jump on a long shot at 50-1 compared to Elliott, who is 4-1 on almost every book to be the top Chevy. Again, Chase Elliott's done fantastic at finishing these races. He's been in contention. I'm not saying that he doesn't, but I'm saying that there's no reason that we shouldn't be looking at Ty Dillon at 50-1. There are a lot of wrecks, and I don't think this hits because Ty Dillon tends to run around towards the back. With that said, I'm hoping if there are a lot of wrecks, he's there at the end of the race, which gives him a chance for us to hit big to start the season and start turn 4 off with a nice little 50-1. I'm not throwing a ton of money at this, but I do like it. It goes back to that fun factor, right? I'm going to have a 50-1 bet that has a legit chance, and there's not many times you're going to get that throughout the season.
Yeah, I agree. And I love this bet. You and I, we've agreed so much. We promise in
it's
future
Daytona.
episodes.
It's not going to happen every week.
I promise we're going to disagree at some points. But right now at Daytona, we're on the same page here. Last year, I took Ty Dillon top Chevy 40-1, and he missed out on top Chevy and top 10 by 1 foot to Chase Elliott. Chase Elliott finished 10th by like a foot over Ty Dillon in 11th. So I missed out on 40-1 top 10. I missed out on plus 350, 41 top Chevy, plus 350 top 10. But I'm totally happy to go back the well here on this one. So right there with you. For my turn 4 pick, I'm going to go, it's the Daytona 500. So I'm going to go with the plus 500s. I'm going to take Todd Gilliland, like you did earlier, Corey LaJoie, Zane Smith, and Chandler Smith each at plus 500 for a top 10. Make sure you grab Zane and Chandler, at least those two, at FanDuel because they are not locked into the race, but FanDuel is must start the race for action. So if they don't make it, you get refunded. But I have all 4 of these guys at over 18% to finish inside the top 10. And even if they take away a little bit from each other, if one of them finishes top 10 and there's only 9 other spots, it's still quite possible to hit 2 of these. I mean, just look at the top 10 parlay heard around the world last year, where one guy parlayed a bunch of the back markers into $1 million with just a $13.50 bet. So we're not able to parlay top 10s anymore thanks to that, but there absolutely is room to get multiple of these guys into the top 10, especially if we have a wreck fest. These guys are going to be a little bit correlated, not as much correlated as the really bad back markers, but these guys will be correlated a little bit. So I'm okay with the fact that they take away spots from each other because all I need is one of them to hit and I profit. And if one of Zane Smith or Chandler Smith gets refunded, which is very, 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 very likely to happen because they're racing in the same duel and Johnson has already locked his way in, then all we need is one to hit and we'll profit 3 units if just one of them hits. So I love backing all 3 of them. I have all 4 of them, I should say. I have all 4 of them over 18% to finish inside the top 10. So make sure you shop around, but also for Zane Smith and Chandler Smith, make sure you look at your house rules when locking in a bet on them. You don't want all bets are action. You want must start for action on Zane Smith and Chandler Smith, but I'm going to take the plus 500s for the Daytona 500. Finish in the top 10 is my turn for pick. All right, time to move into victory lane. We've completed the lap. We won the race. Stevie, give us our victory lane pick.
Well, I'm gonna bring back some confetti when this guy wins the race and throw it up in the air for next week's segment for victory lane. But it wouldn't be the Daytona 500 if we didn't pick a race winner, and we both agree this is one of our favorites for sure. We're gonna go Ryan Blaney to win the Daytona 500. You can get this anywhere from plus 1,200 to plus 1,300. Shop it around. Finished top 15 in all 4 super speedway races last year. Best average finish, including 2 top 5s, 8 lead lap finishes, and 15 career Daytona 500 or Daytona races, 7 lead lap finishes in the last 10 super speedway races. He's going to be there at the end. He's going to spend most of the day out front, hopefully. Ryan Blaney was so unlucky not to win a race last year. I know we talked about it a lot last week. We're going to start our championship campaign off with Ryan Blaney here. And I think he's going to get the Daytona 500 win. And I think it's going to be Austin Cindric pushing Ryan Blaney with Joey Logano pushing Austin Cindric. They're just going to form a train and they're going to say, we owe you everything. And Ryan Blaney is going to win the Daytona 500 this week.
Yeah, I actually do think that's a part of my capping process. I'm very much a numbers guy, but I certainly am cool with buying into that narrative as well, especially when my numbers are showing value on Ryan Blaney. Ryan Blaney last year led the most laps at the 4 super speedway races. So again, I'm not counting the Atlanta races. Just at the 4 super speedway races, he led 90 of the 737 laps. That's 12.2%. If you were to translate that into betting odds, 12.2%, that would be like plus 750 in that ballpark, give or take a little bit. So that's a long way up to plus 12 or plus 1,300, I think, is even floating out there on him. So I wrote him up at 12-1 on Action Network in the Action app. I wrote him up at 12-1. I bet him 13-1 when he opened at FanDuel, but I'm happy to bet him at 12-1 as well. So he's widely available out there at 12-1. Love Ryan Blaney. He is our victory lane pick. And dude, that's the show. That's the Daytona 500 show. Any final thoughts for you, Stevie? I mean, I know we're both super excited.
No, I mean, I can't wait. Being excited is one thing. Being at Daytona is another thing. So I can't even tell you how pumped I am for this race. I got Blaney at 12-1 as well. So I'm hoping to start the season off. He is my only full unit bet so far on the Daytona 500 that is not a top 10 or group bet. So really hoping that Blaney starts the season off right. But yeah, Nick, man, I'm pumped. I'm ready. I can't wait to be at the race. I love being at Daytona. I've been going since I was like 4 or 5 years old. So can't wait to be there on Sunday. I'll be there all week. So yeah, man, pumped isn't even the right word. There's not a word that like describes the feeling when you know you're going to be at Daytona for a weekend.
Oh yeah, there's no better feeling in the world. And like you, he's my only full unit bet that isn't a top 10 bet or group bet as well, or matchup bet as well. So yeah, it's super exciting. And man, I'm just ready. I hope you all are ready as well. Good luck with your bets, because that's going to do it for us. Thank you for listening to the Daytona 500 episode of Running Hot, the all new motorsports betting podcast from Action Network. We'll be back this time next week for the final race under the current 2-mile configuration at Auto Club Speedway before they change that up. Last year's race had an exciting finish, so I'm very excited for cars to race there again at Auto Club Speedway. On behalf of my co-host, Stephen Young, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you back here next week on Running Hot from Action Network.